The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long, sharp shadows across the parched asphalt of a lonely two-lane highway. For Arthur Vance, this was meant to be a quiet journey. A ritual of remembrance and a long-delayed promise kept to a man who had spent 40 years in a sorting office. Dreaming of precision engineering, he sat behind the wheel of a masterpiece, a vehicle funded by 15 years of disciplined savings. And the weight of a legacy. The engine hummed with a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat that felt more alive than inanimate. The blue and red strobes erupted in his rearview mirror, with a jarring, artificial brightness that sliced through the evening haze. Arthur checked his speedometer. Exactly 2 miles under the limit. He signaled slowed and pulled onto the gravel shoulder. He knew the protocol. He had lived it as a citizen and enforced it as a professional. Hands on the wheel, movement slow. Voice level, no room for error. The officer who approached didn't look like a man seeking public safety. He moved with a heavy-booted swagger, his hand resting on his holster in a way that signaled intent. Rather than caution, this was Marcus Thorne, a man whose personnel file in Oak Haven County was a graveyard of dismissed complaints and proactive policing. He looked at the sleek aerodynamic lines of the vehicle. Then at Arthur, the contempt was immediate. A physical presence in the humid air. License and registration. Thorne barked, his voice like gravel officer. My license is in my back pocket. I'm reaching for it now, Arthur said, his voice a model of professional restraint. Thorne snatched the plastic card. Barely glancing at it, his eyes were fixed on the interior. The hand-stitched upholstery, the digital display, the luxury that he decided in an instant did not belong to the man sitting in it. He leaned in, the scent of stale tobacco and aggression rolling off him. Where'd someone like you get a ride like this? Thorne sneered before Arthur could answer. The officer turned and spat directly onto the polished metal of the hood. Expensive car and a criminal behind the wheel. Get out now, Arthur complied. He was a veteran of the National Bureau's Internal Affairs Unit. He knew how to read a crime scene as it was being born. He felt the rough grip on his collar as Thorne dragged him out, slamming him face first against the hot metal. The heat bit into his skin, but Arthur remained limp, offering no resistance. I'm a federal employee, Arthur stated, his voice muffled against the vehicle. Identification number 9921. Thorne laughed, a jagged, ugly sound. A mall guard? A night watchman? He looked at his partner, Deputy Silas, who stood by the patrol unit, eyes averted and feet shifting nervously. Thorne pulled out a tactical folding knife. With a slow, deliberate motion, he plunged the blade into the driver's seat. He dragged it down the material, unzipping. With a sickening tear, Arthur closed his eyes. He thought of his father's calloused hands pressing against the dealership window decades ago. One day, son. One day we will be the ones inside. Thorne wasn't finished. Frustrated by the lack of contraband in the cabin, he walked to the side of the vehicle. He took his heavy ring of iron keys and, with a grunt of effort, gouged a deep, jagged furrow from the front headlight all the way to the rear. The sound of metal on metal was a high-pitched scream. In the quiet afternoon, he kicked the door, the panel crumpling like foil, and shattered the side mirror with a single blow. From his heavy flashlight, looks like you've got some prior damage here. Thorne grinned, his eyes bright with a terrifying kind of joy. Maybe you shouldn't drive things you can't maintain. A dark SUV slowed down 60 yards away. Elena Brooks, a retired magistrate, watched the scene through her windshield. She didn't keep driving. She reached for her phone and pressed record, her hand steady as she captured the deputy's smile and the systematic destruction of the vehicle. Thorne hauled Arthur to the patrol car, throwing him into the back seat. Then, in a final act of unprovoked destruction, Thorne climbed into his own cruiser. He slammed it into reverse and floored the accelerator. The police interceptor rocketed backward, slamming into the front of the stationary vehicle. The impact was deafening. The front end buckled into a jagged wreck, and vital fluids began to bleed out onto the dry soil. Dispatch, Thorne said into his radio, his voice casual. Suspect's vehicle rolled into mine during a high-risk arrest. Minor contacts, send a tow to the impound. The walls of the Oak Haven County booking room were a sickly, jaundiced shade of gray. Arthur stood in silence as he was processed. He watched the officers. He watched the way they joked, the way they ignored the federal government entry under his occupation. Assuming it was a desperate fiction, Arthur knew the power of the silence he was keeping. If he revealed his full credentials now, the technical glitches would begin immediately. Hard drives would be wiped. Stories would be synchronized. He needed them to commit their lies to paper. He needed the official record to be a monument to their corruption. He needed the false reports filed and signed. While Arthur sat in a concrete cell, the world was waking up. Elena Brooks's video had hit the internet like a tidal wave. By midnight, it had millions of views. By Tuzicum, a senior analyst at the National Bureau's regional headquarters, had identified the man in the handcuffs. The next morning, the Oak Haven County Sheriff's Station was quiet, until 4 black sedans pulled into the lot. 10 men and women in dark suits stepped out, led by Special Agent in Charge David Miller. They moved with the cold rhythmic purpose of a storm front. In the station's conference room, Miller stood before Sheriff Sterling, Captain Reed, and a still smirking Thorne. Miller didn't offer a handshake. He placed the leather case on the table and flipped it open. The gold seal inside caught the fluorescent light. Yesterday, Miller's voice was like grinding stones. Your deputy arrested Senior Agent Arthur Vance, a 15-year veteran of the Public Corruption Task Force. The color drained from Thorne's face so fast, it was as if his life force had been extinguished. The smirk didn't just fade. It vanished into a mask of pure terror. Miller slid high-resolution photographs across the table. The slashed interior, the key gouge, the shattered mirror. Then he played the video. They watched Thorne's cruiser ram the car. They heard the crunch. They heard Thorne's lie to dispatch. You filed a report claiming the vehicle rolled forward, Miller said, looking at Captain Reed, who had signed off on the document without a second thought. That is a false federal statement. You claimed he reached for a weapon. That is a civil rights violation. You disabled your body camera manually. That is evidence tampering. These are not mistakes. These are felonies. He leaned over the table, his shadow falling over Thorne. Agent Vance's specialty is putting people like you in cages. You didn't just pick the wrong car. You picked the man who knows exactly how to dismantle your life. The fallout was a scorched earth campaign of federal justice. The Bureau's Civil Rights Division descended on the county. They didn't just look at Arthur's case. They opened the tombs of the last decade. They found 42 other drivers Thorne had targeted. They found 12 other accidental vehicle damages. Deputy Silas, terrified of the looming shadow of a federal penitentiary, was the first to break. He sat in an interview room and laid bare the rotted culture of the department. He told them how Thorne would hunt for expensive vehicles, driven by those he deemed unworthy. He told them how Captain Reed would bury the complaints to keep the department's conviction rates high. He enjoyed the power, Silas whispered, his voice trembling. He said he wanted to remind them of their place. He thought he was untouchable because the sheriff had his back. The consequences were absolute and devastating. Marcus Thorne was indicted on federal charges of deprivation of rights, under color of law, destruction of property, and falsifying federal records. He was sentenced to 60 months in a federal high-security facility, 5 years where he would be the one under total control. He was ordered to pay full restitution for the vehicle, a debt that would follow him for the rest of his life. Captain Reed was dismissed without a pension and faced separate charges for obstruction of justice. The sheriff's department was placed under a federal consent decree, a permanent oversight body that stripped them of their autonomy and forced a total overhaul of their training and hiring practices. Oak Haven County settled the civil suit for $3 million. Arthur Vance didn't keep the money for personal gain. He funneled the entirety of it into a foundation for legal aid and into the community center of the woman who had dared to press record on that highway. Months later, Arthur stood in his garage. The space where the masterpiece had once sat was empty. He had the funds to buy another, but he chose a simple, reliable commuter vehicle instead. Some dreams once shattered by malice aren't meant to be reconstructed. They are meant to be remembered as the catalyst for change. He looked at an old photo on his desk. His father smiling in his work uniform. Arthur didn't have the car anymore, but he had something far more valuable. He had the knowledge that on a lonely stretch of road, he hadn't just survived an injustice, he had dismantled the system of tyranny and replaced it with a foundation of accountability. The promise was kept not in the metal, but in the truth. Justice isn't a destination. It's the work of making sure the next person doesn't have to be as lucky or as powerful as he was to be treated with dignity. The engine of the law had finally turned in the right direction.